This is Dr. Carla Fowler. I am the founder of THAXA Executive Coaching, and you are listening to the DiscoPosse podcast.
There's all this explosions and stingers and wildness, and here we are. A podcast conversation that's been in the making for a bit, and I'm thankful we got to put it together. So, Dr. Fowler, thank you, first of all, for joining us today. I've been a fan of looking, obviously into the work you've done with the team that you've built at THAXA, what the idea is, and there is so much goodness that I want to explore because it's very personally meaningful to me, the way that you've identified and the way you've chosen to solve a very challenging problem that isn't just the usual witticisms of motivational Gary Vaynerchuk style of delivery that litters my LinkedIn feed, and the same set of listicles and suggestions on how to be a better leader and how to maximize performance. There's so much of what we do when we talk about the science and the art of success, and even defining success is such a brutal thing to begin with, because immediately success is relative to your personal goals, your company's personal goals, your fiduciary responsibility as a company. There's a lot of things that come into this. So we're going to talk about THAXA. We're going to talk about a science and, human-based approach to delivering the best of yourself and what you're doing with the team. But before we go much further, for folks that are brand new to you, if you want to do a quick introduction, and we'll get to how you got started, because boy, oh boy, you've got a great story to begin with.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, thank you so much for having me on the show. And I too have been looking forward to this conversation. By way of the theme you introduced, my background is a little different than most, but just to go straight to the now, for the past 12 years, I'm the founder and coach at THAXA Executive Coaching, and it is a firm and a methodology based around performance science. So helping leaders of lots of different types across industries you really use performance science as they're thinking about how are they going to go be successful? How are they going to approach goals where there's a lot of uncertainty and risk? And maybe at a fundamental level, like how they want to reach what is their full potential or expression of their potential. And that is what I've been doing for the past 12 years. But as you know, I didn't, originally set out to say, hey, I want to be an executive coach and I'm going to design a methodology, and it's all going to be based around like success and performance. So my backstory goes back, a long way, and there are definitely some common threads that link everything together. But prior to coaching, I was actually on an academic medicine pathway. So what this means is, let's say starting post-college, I was in like a 9 to 10 year program that was set out to train physicians in both science and medicine. So it is like the big double stuffed Oreo of like education. For all those people who are like a glutton for punishment, you essentially start medical school and you do 2 years of that. Then all your colleagues continue onward, but you go into the lab instead and you pick generally a biomedical science, but not always. And you do a PhD, and that can take anywhere from like 3 to 5 years. And then once you've gotten yourself through the gauntlet that is a PhD defense, generally in a hard science, you then have to go back to the clinic. So all that stuff you were studying, but you put it down for about 5 years, you have to go back and finish your last 2 years of medical school and go through like the residency match. And then theoretically, like, you have your MD at that point, you go into residency, you start practicing as you are a physician, but kind of still in training. And that is the pathway that I was on prior to this. And And, a lot of people ask me the question of like, well, okay, so you were doing that and that sounds pretty intense. How did you end up making that switch 13 years ago? And this is where I back up the story even more, because I was not a kid who said, I want to be a doctor when I grow up. So wasn't going to be a coach, wasn't like obsessed with medicine. But the thing that I remember just very early on is that I always have been really interested in how things work. And particularly, I think I was pretty interested in sort of the performance of human beings. Like, so a great example of this is whether it was like in fifth grade or like middle school, who were people who were winning the athletic events, right? Like if there was a track meet, who was winning it? What were some of the techniques they used? Like I remember there was this like cross country race in fourth and fifth grade, and we got to put together teams for it. And I remember sitting down with my best friend at the time, and I was like, well, should we run the course in the morning beforehand? Like, I don't know what I said. I think I was like, well, maybe so we like know the turns and like we're just sort of prepared. I had like all these ideas because I really wanted our team to win. But that was just how I was thinking about things. And I was looking around, I was watching other people. And in particular, I think I gravitated towards things that were really challenging because I think there was a piece of me that understood even at that point that you were going to have some challenges in life. And as a kid, you often don't have a lot of control over what those things are going to be. And I think I was grasping around for like, how does one live in the face of that? Like what are going to be your survival strategies? And so I think that was another common thread that manifests pretty early, like in middle school, where it was like, oh, well, maybe a strategy is you need to go find the hardest things you can do, somehow get through the discomfort of doing them, and then emerge on the other side feeling a little stronger. So these are some of the themes that then I think led along the way to some other places. But that as a starting place is, again, didn't start out thinking I'm going to be a doctor, didn't start out thinking I'm going to be a scientist, but definitely had that curiosity very early on and that attraction to like, what is hard and what would be possible for you if you can figure out how to do that thing that's hard.
And there's an interesting thing of where the science, especially when anything performance related, there's this misunderstanding that you have to be able to do the thing at the performance level you're describing in order to be successful in coaching somebody on reaching the performance level you're describing. And it's actually not like you need to understand the heuristics. You need to understand, a lot of things around the activity, sports, whatever it is, job role. But it's more that your expertise is in understanding how to get people to pull performance out of themselves in a way that they least expect, or the way that they can at least maximize. And especially when you think of, there's like 101 performance, which is, make your bed, those kind of things, which we all need sometimes, make sure the laundry goes away and you don't live in the doom pile of where Laundry Mountain continues to stack up and then it becomes drier extra mountain. And then like, there's certain day-to-day management stuff that has to happen. But then to get to the sort of high achiever level, the differences are so tiny, but the point that gets them to that like tiny differentiation is this huge exponential leap in the way you approach the training, the day-to-day. And now that's the thing that's often, overlooked. People say, I'm going to buy a book on performance, right? And I got no shortage of books. The section in the bookstore about self-help is so large for a reason, because you keep coming back and buying another book. I've been self-helping myself to nowhere for 50 years. Now,
I'd say not to nowhere, but
I guess it.
Point
but
taken.
I'll say I loved the idea of understanding why people get where they are, and that became a learning method for me, that I became curious by nature, and that was my success, I think, is that I'm never not curious about what could be done with the criteria we've got in front of us. And also questioning things too, because we hear about like settled science. If we went on settled science, we'd still be using leeches. There's a lot
Yeah.
of settled science that got unsettled once we made further
Yes.
discovery. Adjust your
Mm-hmm.
priors, take in additional knowledge, and even if you want to get really deep and think of as a Bayesian inference that we're like nudging ourselves towards things statistically, it comes out in science. But it's funny that it's very much feel for most of our lives, and then we don't like to be measured as well. That's another human
Yeah.
problem, is like, how do I get stacked on a ranking scale versus another
Mm-hmm.
person, let alone my own personal goals? It's so human performance is such a fascinating thing.
Yes.
And even sometimes the people that are doing it don't even know why or how they're doing it, which is even more fun because you get to like look at their performance. But that's how I would like to look at it. Say like, I don't want to learn how to get strong. I want to learn how people get strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than find a person to read a book on, I would find 10 books to read on and then find the commonalities. I was a cyclist,
Mm-hmm.
so I learned like there's 3 different ways to do, performance cycling. They were at odds with each other.
Absolutely. I mean, you
It's
see the same
wild.
thing in like endurance running, right? Some people train a lot of miles successfully. Some people have learned like, no, they do less miles, they do it a little bit faster, but that's what their body tolerates. And both can be very
Right.
successful strategies, which is, I think, what you're pointing out, which is so interesting. And I think part of many people ask me about the switch from being in like an academic science and even studying all that medicine has to offer into coaching. And I think one reasonable like big question about that is like, hey, you went from something like so technical and so deep into something that can have a lot of platitudes in it, that can have maybe it could just be viewed, and I'm okay with realities of how things are viewed sometimes culturally, but just like as less deep. But what's interesting is because it is a passion area for me, even just performance, but the science of it, but also like how it manifests in human beings. Because again, just because in medicine, a treatment is like statistically the best treatment. Probabilistically, it came in above the bar for the FDA or whatever. Doesn't mean that it will cure everyone or fix everyone.
Right.
The same is true with performance. And so both the idea of how you said you read 10 books and you try to pull out what are some of the commonalities, as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to try and cycle like this person or like this person. Principles are helpful because there is a lot of noise in the field. And that was one of the first things as I was starting to coach and build a methodology, was this idea of saying, okay, like people are not coming to you for an academic lesson. Like, and I was always a person who I think I'm built like an applied scientist, even though I was literally doing very like nitty gritty bench cancer research stuff when I was in the lab. But I don't think I'm an academic at heart. And I certainly have training to read things and understand it, but I've always thought you got to make stuff useful for people. And the most important tools people can use for performance are all about like, what can they actually access? And so you got to cut through a lot of the noise because people they can't build 20 different habits at once. You got to sort of know what's probably most important principle wise. And so when you read 10 books and do that distillation, that's like what you're doing. But then you also have to know that what sticks and resonates for one person is going to be different than for another person. So I also love the depth of not just understanding and distilling the science, but then the ability to sit down with someone like a startup founder and figure out what's going to be motivating to them, what's going to be effective for them, and even what are the most important things we should be working on together.
Yeah.
And that then gives it, if you think of this as a matrix where you've got like performance on one axis and you've got the span of individuality on the other. I mean, that to me is like a bottomless field of like great things to think about. So I just loved what you were bringing up about performance as a topic area. Totally
And
resonates
the
with
interesting
me.
thing when we look at, math and stats, we always want to say, like, how is this represented statistically or probabilistically across a population? And because we need to, like, that's the ideal, is that we want to figure out,
Yeah.
is there some specific criteria that can
Hmm.
move the needle? And as a general practice, funny thing is, let's say, going back to, I got it from Grey's Anatomy, but I'm sure obviously it came from the OG was John Hopkins, was it was the idea of see one, do one, teach one.
Mm.
So whenever I was learning anything, everything I would do, I would like seek out the
Yeah.
knowledge, then I would practically do the thing, and then I would immediately say, how do I teach somebody near me? Because as I'm explaining it, it forced me to rethink how I
Hmm.
learned it, because I had to then back out the order of what do I need to, and you have to think very purposefully of, am I introducing something that requires prior knowledge? And
Yeah.
then
Hmm.
you're backing yourself into, like, or rather away from the curse of knowledge, which is one of the most brutal things that we face, especially in the tech industry. Someone's just like, what, don't
Yeah.
you get this? Like, it just works, like it is. And they explain it and you're like, calm down, founder. You know that you're here for a reason, because you chose to solve a seemingly intractable problem. But everyone you're talking to, they're not thinking intractable problem. They're just like, this sucks. So when you
Yeah.
explain it, don't assume that they know that, like, for 37 years, this has been a known problem, or like there's a solution that's been available. You're like, no one knows that. Like, let's just
Yeah.
start from scratch, as if you just had 2 minutes with this person. Like, and it's often done by asking, not by telling. That's the other thing that I find
Mm.
great leaders and great performers are continuously curious, mostly of
Hmm.
themselves, I think, because there's a self discipline that's needed, but discipline is continuing to question whether you're being as effective as you can be. It's like there's a
Yeah.
skepticism that has to go with it, because you can never accept it. If you ever feel that you're like, I feel good about this, I'm like, oh, no, 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 this is a problem. Like, am I leaving something on the table? If I feel comfortable, I'm like, that's why it's all about ship early, validate often, socialize, like all these
Hmm.
things we do when we're validating our hypotheses. That's what we have to do. But
Yeah.
it's very easy for us to go into, a leader is strong, they know the answer, and they will tell you, like, that's actually the complete opposite. They're seeking the answer through a statement
Hmm.
more
Yeah.
than telling you the thing. It's like, same way that people ask questions, we call them quest statements, right? When you're at a
Ah,
Q&A, most people are there just to kind of try and take you off your kilter a bit. And you'll notice in how they ask. But again, great leaders
yeah.
and people that are become, driven, as we say, it's because they have this continuous natural belief that it could be better. There's got to, like, I want to question,
Hmm.
did I do everything the right way? Is there something I could adjust next time? And that machine just never stops.
Yeah. And you're highlighting this really interesting sort of phenomenon in performance, which over time, like I may have intuited some of it as I was going about, whether it was academics or athletics, trying to, push my own performance. But this idea of a lot of performance, we think about performance in the extremes. So we often think about, like, the person who puts in the 100-hour work week. Certainly when I was a general surgery resident at Stanford, like, that's just what you're doing,
That's
right?
just how
But
it goes,
same for
right?
a
Just
startup
frightening
founder.
yourself.
Yeah. We think about performance at the extremes. However, more and more, both as I have studied performance, but also as I like work with people, I see the places where performance is a thing in tension. So, for example, in like what you just brought up about, there is often this characteristic in high performing people of always kind of asking, but how could this be improved? You could call this an optimizer standpoint. You could call it just always skeptical, or even it's never good enough, right?
Right.
Kind of viewpoint. And that both, to a degree, will push high performance, right? Because you are looking, you're not kind of just sitting back on your laurels. On the other hand, like there are ways in which that fuel that can push high performance also can be counter to, for example, confidence, or even sustainability. Like for a team, for example, if you're leading a team, and yeah, it is good to always be trying to improve things. But also we have to know like to what degree is asking those questions helping improve something in a really meaningful way versus saying, okay, now we're down to like the 0.1% that isn't actually getting us better customer uptake and instead is just burning out my team. Or we're optimizing and we really need to ship, but we keep optimizing. And I liked how you framed it. Like, yeah, you always want to be asking, but part of the asking isn't delay your ship. It's ship early. It's validate often. And so this point of performance often is intention, and it can sometimes be useful to ask, what two things are actually in tension here? If you said, I have a principle where I think the answer is at the extreme. Like the more I can work, the better. I always like to be skeptical and say, so now we're going to use this as a meta principle to say, yes, but what is the trade-off of that? There is generally a trade-off, and it's worth at least verbalizing it so you can make a choice versus just saying, well, on LinkedIn or Twitter, everyone is, or X, like everyone is just, I think they're all working all the time. Well, maybe, but what's the trade-off of that? And so that's just a principle I love to say is ask yourself if you're ever like one-dimensional about something, but what's the second order effect? What's the trade-off of that? And the same is true for performance.
And I find that there's, this is where the dichotomy of humans comes in, is that we're by nature, we want to feel confident and we want to feel right about things. Like we want to feel we're heading in the right direction. And then there's this other side, and I hope that I end up in it. Like, boy, oh boy, I love to be right, but I seek the right answer far more than I seek to be right. You know, I'd love to have gotten there first, but I'd rather be heading towards the right solution. And I'm happy to be corrected. It's actually kind of a good thing, because otherwise you realize how often you went ahead and people just didn't say anything, and you're like, oh. Yeah. And especially when you're a founder and you're betting a financial runway that is limited, you're betting people's times, which is limited, you're betting the ability to innovate and execute on an idea within an amount of time that can generate material value that's then will drive, results for the company at the investor level. But more than anything, you're trying to do something that actually delights a person on the other side. We're not starting startups because we like to start startups. We're starting startups because we love solving problems. And we're just obsessed with the idea that like this problem's got to be bigger than me. And I'm willing to bet a bunch of people's lives on it. And that is now an interesting thing of your performance also has to get aggregated onto how it maps into the company. And what are the values that you instill on your leadership team and the ethos and the mission of the company? Because they, especially as a founder, it really generally reflects a personal extension of your story until it reaches a point where we have lots of validation and proof points, and then it validates it. But the greatest leaders, often you go back and you find their pitch deck for their first, investor, and it just looks like a tiny version of the current product page 15 years later. And you think like, okay, that's what I look for. And that boldness to pick a problem and just say like, this needs to be solved, there's a beauty in the stubbornness that's required to do that.
Yeah. Well, and, sometimes your point about like, yeah, we all want to be right. We want to have some certainty in our brains. Like our brains were built to dislike uncertainty for some very good biological reasons. But also, not unlike being a scientist, being an entrepreneur, being a founder is like entrepreneurship is essentially the scientific method or vice versa, right? Like you are going to do something where there isn't like a playbook because you're actually trying to do something differently or you're trying to learn something different often than what someone has done before. And So one of the interesting, I think about performance science with like different buckets. So this is just a little like referencing one of the buckets that I think, and we can come back to the other ones later, but I think a lot about mindset is one of the buckets. Our psychology about things absolutely has something to do with our performance. And this is true whether we are in a thought performance type role, which of course we know also has physical elements. Like if you're a business leader, turns out it still matters whether you're eating well and how much you sleep and if you exercise. Yeah. In the same way we learned with athletes, it matters what's going on in your head, not just how well you've trained like your legs or your arms, right? But mindset is this interesting bucket. And one of the sort of ideas or ways that mindset gets really interesting is when you can start to take something you know is true, like our brains want certainty. They want to feel right about something. And yet, as you pointed out, you got to be like, you got to not prioritize wanting to be right with being sort of a little bit stupid or negligent about something that impacts a whole company and a team and the success of a product. And so sometimes it's interesting, the approaches that we get from through that mindset bucket of performance is we can start to say, well, how can we combine the fact that you want to be right with what would actually be helpful in this situation? So for example, what if you don't know about a particular sort of direction to take something, but instead of saying, I need to be right about that, if you said, I need to be right about my approach, I need to like win at my approach for answering that, what would be a top-notch approach versus much more destination thinking of, I need to have the right answer. And so this is an interesting tool. And what I love about sort of having different buckets of performance science is it gives us a lot of different avenues to start to solve some challenge that someone is experiencing or comes in with. So the mindset route is one of the ways we could start to approach it, to say, well, whether or not you ultimately get the right answer, and this is a little like bringing some of Annie Duke's work into this, like, can you have a good decision-making process, for example? And like that you can still tap into that bucket to say, yeah, you want to be right. So how about we talk about how you could design a good process, but also how you would like talk about that process to your key stakeholders who are like probably, leaning on you to say, what direction are you taking this? What are you doing? But so this is an interesting thing where science helps us kind of almost break down like what are typical maybe coaching dilemmas or problems, really normal stuff that people might come into a coach for, but like rather than try and just like shoot cliches at throw cliches at the fridge, see what sticks. We could
just got to measure what matters, and the rest will, and the score will take care of itself, and all these beautiful sport witticisms from sports that I don't watch. I always love.
An important person to me loves to say, "What's the next 500 words?" Yeah. like sure, measure what matters. What's the next 500 words? Yeah. But this is something I love about breaking things down or thinking about them from a little more of a scientific perspective, is it gives us some interesting ways to like use our brains, use our bodies to help us do the stuff that's hard. Like, and I can give a personal example. Like, so I was doing my MD PhD, but I was always someone who really loved having a multi-channel life. So I think back in the back of my brain, I was still like, yeah, but if I could be a pro athlete, I'd really love that, on the side. And I'd always been athletic. I had run cross country in high school. I walked onto the rowing team at Brown for my undergrad and did that for a couple of years. And then I started playing ultimate frisbee, which was a totally different kind of sport because I'd never played a field sport before. And I started in undergrad, but then went back to Seattle to do my MD PhD program. And Seattle actually has a number of elite level ultimate frisbee teams. So they play in the national tournament.
I lived in Vancouver for years. Surprising that I used to see quite a bit of it.
Okay, yeah, because Vancouver, we played up there frequently. Also, Vancouver had excellent elite level teams as well. And I think I just got it in my head that I was like, well, okay, this is kind of a fringe sport, but they go to world championships. I want to be a world champion. Like, that sounds great. And So I still had some college eligibility left. So I played in grad school for UW, but also tried out for the elite level women's team. And I made the team. And in some ways, I had no business making the team. I'd been playing for about like a year and a half. But what I realized was you really got to think about what you're going to focus on. And it was very clear to me that I would never have been one of the handlers, sort of like the quarterback, who's very good at like throwing and catching, very good kind of hand-eye coordination. But I was just really athletic. So I was fast, I was very fit. And I looked at the whole thing and I was like, well, what I need to focus on being right about is like, I'm never going to be a great thrower. I need to not be a liability, but I need to focus on what I can do to be as fast as possible. And so I ran a lot. I did crazy plyometric programs. I don't know if you remember Air Alert. This was like something in the 90s. It was like a dunking program to help people like dunk the basketball. But I actually just focused on that because I was like, this is a thing you could be sure you're performing at and like focus where you can put your efforts and like see if that's enough to like get you over that bar. And then once I was on the team, if you play against really great players, turns out you have to like improve. And so certainly became much better after that. But it's this idea of saying, yeah, how can you look at something and say, what's the most potent thing I can do here? What's an avenue of attack that's both accessible, but also will set you up for success? And often that you can kind of think it out. And it doesn't mean you're always at the extreme or good at everything. But anyways.
It's actually, well, the interesting thing is the very fact that you are purposefully going into something that you know you're going to not be good at with the goal of becoming good at it. Like you already are accepting a base level of mediocrity. Like I may be good. Like if you're generally athletic, you know, I can probably get away with certain things. Like I'll be able to do better than somebody just coming off the sidewalk.
Right.
But then you hold yourself to the standard of the person, you know, that you see athletically above you, or, you know, psychologically at a different place with how they manage their experience than you. And so we often look to we talk about it as a group of peers, but they're peers with particular sets of skills and subsets of skills that you know, pick from in that group. And quite often there's like the super leader, you know, there'll be the quarterback, the protected one, you know, but they also at the same time are often they are leaders in an individual way, which is an interesting thing because they know they have to do something. As a cyclist, this is the thing is a cycling team is generally, especially in like general classification for like Tour de France and big stuff like multi-day races, you've got a leader. You got one person, you know, that has to have the amalgam of skills across all the disciplines. And then you put other people around them to protect them from what could take them out of that market and out of that opportunity. And now you're building a team, which is a dynamic. Now, this is a very different thing. Like there's an individual contributor strength, but if you have a great individual rider that has no team, they are not going to be at the lead at the end. That's just how it's going to work. So they learn to, I've even seen ones where like really great sprinters and they've got a low end team, but they got invited to a race. So what do? Do the smartest thing. They grab onto the tail of the top team in the group and ride off their lead out. Like if I don't have a lead out team, somebody else does. So I just have to kind of make sure I get around theirs. And there's an ingenuity to that. Like if I don't have the skill, I'm going to find out where to get it. And if I don't have a way to get it, I'm going to find out who has it and find out how I can integrate with it. And you become very aware of your participation in an ecosystem more than your individual capabilities.
Well, and I love that added layer of complexity, right? You've just added into performance is that actually most of the performance games we're playing, if you're an entrepreneur, you're doing a startup, it's not an individual race. It is like multiple orders more complex than that. And yet it is nice. Like athletics gives us some models for like okay, and even how might you approach that? So but it is like when you stop thinking about, okay, individual performance and you start to think about team performance, to say, hey, we win or lose as a team. It doesn't matter if like I never dropped the Frisbee, like if I couldn't throw a good enough pass that someone else could catch it, well, like, yeah, that's on both of us.
Yep.
And so this is, I often, like, people often ask questions or even come into coaching where they're really thinking about their team. So they are thinking about their individual performance as a leader, but also thinking very much about, hey, how do I help my team perform at a high level? And I think this performance science has a lot of interesting things as we kind of work through the buckets to say, what are some things to be thinking about on that? One of the most surprising things that I discovered really early in my coaching was places where I thought we were working on one thing, and we were, and I'll give the example in a moment, but actually we realized that we got something an unexpected benefit out of it. We did actually get the first benefit, but we got this totally unexpected second benefit as well. And so the story was that I, as part of my methodology, always started out coaching people with an eye towards strategy. So another bucket of performance. We talked about a mindset bucket. Okay, now let's talk about the strategy bucket. The idea behind strategy, very simply, not overcomplicated, is that your strategy is you have to know what you're aiming at, because if you're, depending on what the goal is, what you're actually going to do might be different. But it's also really making choices. It's making trade-offs. It's saying, here are the few things we are going to do and invest in, and here's like all the things we're not going to invest in because we don't have the time and resources, and we don't want to let spreading ourselves out or diluting ourselves really kill our chance of success at the things that are more important. So strategy is about making choices and figuring out what are those most potent right things to be doing given the goal you have. And I always like to start coaching thinking through, what does a client want to have happen? That could be their goals. Like sometimes people come in with SMART goals, like very well like defined, but I actually like to start with the question, what do you want to have happen? So we don't get too distracted in the making the perfect goal, just to really try and understand. And then we go through an exercise where I ask a lot of questions, and people are wonderfully patient with this process. It takes multiple hours, but we keep it energized. And at the end, we really can start to see like those root causes come up, those things that are interconnected, and we can often figure out what are actually some of the most important things that need to get invested in given what they want to accomplish. So we start in the strategy bucket. I had a client come in, we did this workshop, and mostly to help him as a leader get some mental clarity, right? So that he was clear. He took the framework that we built and actually brought it back to his team. It wasn't part of the assignment. Sometimes people keep these things private, but he shared it with his team, and the team just like lit up. Like they were so excited. They were asking all of these questions, like they just fully engaged. And then they were like, hey, that's my priority. Like that priority in the framework, that's all me. And I want to make a framework for how I'm doing that priority. Like, so they wanted their own sort of clarity around it. But so the expected result was like, the leader definitely got more clarity about what they were doing. And they were able to actually communicate it to their team, which is really important if you want your team to all play together and to know how to win together. The unexpected benefit was the team got super motivated. So going back to that psychology bucket, somehow like a strategic exercise ended up totally giving us a benefit in that other area where people were like, I can see how I contribute. I can see how we're going to win together. And I see why I matter. And so this is one of those interesting exercises where there's both a performance thing for the leader, because it's important to know what you're aiming at so you can use resources potently, so you don't burn out, your team, to basically give yourself the best chance of success with the 24 hours in a day you have. It's important to have clarity as a leader, but also a benefit now for the team. The team can understand how to play together. Where are they going to focus their time? What is valued in terms of their contributions? So I love these places where we can both think about a benefit for the individual but also then say, and what does that benefit for the team?
And there's an interesting
those
thing
moments.
of there's a belief that it's all about, being right. And it's like, well, the best thing you can do is very quickly get to wrong. Like even in sales, we talk about the idea of like you're fighting for a yes. Like no, you're basically getting to say no as much as you can until they're out of no. Like it's about elimination as
Yeah.
much as it is additive activities. And when you
Mm-hmm.
look at, in programming and product management, the phrase we often use is called ruthless pragmatism. And it's, you have to say it in that way, it's like ruthless. It's like it has to come from your
Yeah.
gut. Like it's like absolutely. Obviously, I'm speaking to somebody who knows very well, because you quite literally labeled it as brutal focus, which I think was so
Yes.
perfect in the description of it, because that's exactly what it is. There's a brutality. It's just like, I got bad news for you. This is what matters. And I know all these other things are exciting. It's not about what you're focusing on. It's what you're defocusing. It's what you're
Yeah.
deprioritizing, so that when that decision tree is in front of you, based on what you know and that brutal focus requirement, you can very quickly prioritize and deprioritize other activities as far as like how much do they attribute to this goal, and
Mm-hmm.
how meaningfully, and what happens if we don't do it. Because I've got 100 great ideas. I share them with my co-founder all the time, and he says, love this idea, put it in an envelope, we'll open it in a month. Like he says, this is a great idea, you're not allowed to think any further on it. He's like, because he knows my silly brain will think like, I'm going to do this by tomorrow. And the fact that we can deprioritize it, accept the direction, accept the choice, but then prioritize accordingly, which could mean a month, could be in a month, 18 months, who knows? And
Mm-hmm.
it's the ASAP problem, right? When we think ASAP, well, people think you mean now. No, I quite literally mean as soon as possible, which means in 18 months.
Yeah.
It's an unsatisfying ASAP, but it's the reality. And that pragmatism is something I've acquired over time, because oh boy, I yesed myself into a lot of bad situations.
Yeah.
That was some hard
Well,
lessons.
and there's quite a bit of mental suffering that can come with starting too many things and feeling not successful at any of them. And this is
Right.
like one of those hidden costs that we don't see when we're starting a lot of things and then trying to keep up with it. And certainly, like burnout of team can be something. Feeling like they never know what is the right priority. These things do matter, and yet, when you're an entrepreneur, almost by your nature, you're often an ideas person. Like it wasn't like, no, I'm not really an ideas person, but I had one great idea and that was the company. It's generally more like, no, I have constant ideas and I filtered and picked one to actually start the company. But that's hard, right? When the thing, one of your best strengths is also a thing you sort of have to keep like a check on.
Yeah.
Because but I like your idea of like, put it in an envelope, open it again a month from now. Other people have I have different clients who put this in different ways, but sometimes it was just like, just write them down, write all the ideas down from this week and wait till next week to look at them again. If things are really fast moving, you'll cross out at least 5 of them even by next Monday. But also another interesting thing is like our brains like to close loops. And this is a function that we can use to our advantage, but also can, again, be something to our detriment. So if we start something, we are more inclined to finish it. Like our brain will want to finish it, to close the
Right.
loop.
There's
So
an
this is
inertia
great.
involved in it, right? Like that's you're heading towards something, so you feel like you're making progress.
Yeah, or it's horse to barn, right? Like we just,
Yeah.
once you've started it. So on the good side of this, I have found that like helping people start things is like it punches way above its weight. So I have a tool we could talk about. I call it the 90-90-90 principle. But the main point is it's like a principle to help people get going on learning a new skill and stacking up sort of the mastery and the time that they'll need to go from 0 to as far as they want, right? But 0 to 1 is the start place. Messy rough drafts, or like many people call it the shitty rough draft. Like getting, like sometimes it's like they need to do a pitch presentation and they're like, oh God, I've been delaying this because I'm worried about what if the investors don't like it? What if they say no? I'm running around fundraising. There are many things that can get in the way of getting started. Or you're stuck in analysis phase. And so you're like, oh, but there's so much more to learn. But if you can even, and sometimes it's, I don't have time. This is such a big project. I don't have time to like really get into it. I tell people never underestimate 10 minutes of time. Like you can get a really crappy rough draft outline done in 10 minutes, almost always. And you'll then open a loop that will make it way easier for you to iterate and finish that thing. So that's the light side. This is the light side of closing loops. If you can get it started, I bet you'll get it done. The dark side of closing loops is what you just brought up, which is like if you start too many things, it is much harder to walk away from them. You get whether it's FOMO or like the sense of loss, the sense of not finishing a thing.
Sunk cost fallacy.
Oh yeah, like super hard on our brains. And so I love this. Again, in performance, there's often a light side and a dark side. But that is the light side and dark side of closing loops. And getting started is really powerful in that regard. But so is brutal focus. Can set you free in a lot of ways.
When I think then the next natural progression in looking at how we approach these problems is, I remember there was a great TED Talk. It was a Catherine Schultz, I think it was called On Being Wrong. And we have a human tendency to, she used the Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. I'm 1,000 years old, so I can use this reference. It probably doesn't mean anything to anybody.
No, but it totally works for me.
There. So, but the whole idea that he runs off the cliff and the smoke is around him and then he stops because he hears the meep, meep, and he looks behind and there's the Roadrunner back on the cliff and he looks down and realizes he's on nothing. And that's this idea of, as a heuristic of human behavior, that we are, in the sunk cost fallacy. Whatever we're doing, we don't want to give it up right away because we don't want to feel that it was started for naught. And there is a personal attachment, like a feeling of the need to complete something. But there's also the beauty in experimentation and the understanding that whether is it right? Maybe it's not right. Maybe it's not right now. Maybe, there's a variety of different ways to think about it. And again, that continuous decision tree of, is what I'm doing leading towards my focused goal? Like that top line, my North Star for, everybody loves to use that, right? But whatever that is, the ultimate goal, everything has to be in service of that, even in small ways. And the ability to have things go strange and then refocus or reassess and be prepared for it. Because, oh boy, things are going to go wrong. They're going to go wrong way more than they're going to go right. And the whole idea is, I think there's a personality of people that love the problem. Like, I love solving problems. I love fixing things. I love cool things. I'm always got cards in my hand. I love a cool trick. I love something that's neat. But I also love the process of figuring out how it works, figuring out how it doesn't work so that I know when it does work, and really spending a lot of time on that development of the skill, but knowing that when something goes wrong, now how do I stay on path? Yeah. And I embrace uncertainty. It's one of the things I love. I worked in disaster recovery and business continuity for years. The more chaotic and scary things become, it is like a sense of calm comes over me, like a comic book character. I feel this beautiful Zen flow because I have it in my mind of what I know we need to do, and you can just defocus everything else and said, what's the most impactful thing I can do right now that will get me one step closer to this thing? It doesn't have to be to the goal. It's like one step further. And especially in disaster, you don't have the choice of like, let's do 20 things. It's like, no. Like, let's now move linear and let's get everybody in a line and then let's get back on the track. And
Yeah.
this is Eli Goldrat's stuff, right? It's the idea of the theory of constraints, and everything we do is like pick your nearest constraint, subjugate the constraint, and then move to the next constraint, measure, etc. Like there's all these things we do, but sorry, there's a long, as a quest
No,
statement I'm giving you here, right? But
but yeah, you don't have time. Also don't have time to overanalyze it. And so
right.
it's like, I'm reminded, and this is also, I'm pretty sure the reference is from cybersecurity as well, but I'm terrible at names and it is not my field. But I loved the idea. I was captured by the idea. Someone was telling me about making decisions around things that have like an 80% chance of improving things 20%. So
Yeah.
The exact numbers are not important here, but I was captivated by the concept. I think it's highly relevant to what you're saying about trying to go forward in the face of uncertainty. Because like when you're in that much uncertainty, there's no choice you can make where you have 100% certainty that it's going to solve the problem. But so it's two things. It's number one, saying, well, I want to have a high-ish level of certainty that this is a good idea because I don't get too many shots on goal when you're in the middle of some kind of disaster recovery crisis. But also to say it doesn't have to solve the whole problem. I just need to like make a play so I can make another play. So I learn what I need to know. So like a 20% improvement versus saying one move needs to solve the whole problem. And I really liked this way of thinking about things, maybe because I'm like mathy nerd, but like, but it was a different way as opposed to thinking in absolutes, thinking about being right or wrong. But saying, I mean, you're in that moment, you're like, I want to be really good at dealing with uncertainty in the face of uncertainty. And what does being really good in the face of uncertainty look like? It's in the same way of being a good scientist and knowing how to, all right, there's a whole different side of this we can talk about. But when my whole career in science, which was, like at least the PhD land was 5 years long, you never knew the answer. You had a job because you didn't know the answer in some ways, because you were constantly trying to learn something that was uncertain. And this idea of saying, so you need to get good at running experiments, which is different from whether or not the biology wants to give you an interesting answer that's worth billions of dollars because it's the next cancer therapeutic. I mean, that would be nice. Right. Nothing I researched ended up being that, but it was fun to try. But yeah,
in
you
a
need
strange
to
way,
be
actually,
good at running
I'll tell you in a
experiments.
minute why it actually did, because there's an interesting upside down result of some of the work of great experimentation that actually was very interesting that you'll probably enjoy.
Awesome. Yeah. But like one of the principles I use around uncertainty and how to have good mindsets around uncertainty is this idea of, can you think about like, what's the experiment you'd want to run? And actually my PhD mentor was like super impactful to me in learning this as a student, because I'd come in and say, I'm going to run this experiment and this one and this one. And he would be like, why? Like what is interesting about those answers, or why would getting those answers forward you or forward the field? And I think this ability to say like, yeah, what experiment do I want to run that would be useful to know the answer of, even if I don't know what the answer is actually going to be, is a very useful question. But now I want to hear everything about the upside down experiments.
Well, it's what's ended up coming is that even where the experiments don't go well, the experiments have been completed, right? And there's some more data that can inform a future decision. So even if that experiment in its temporal existence did not produce the expected or desired result, you've got it marked in time. The scientific method allows us to say, like, let's just simply change one criteria at a time and continue to measure so we can actually understand the direct effect of a particular change. Now, there's a lot of heuristics that will say that actually there's still variations on that, but for the most part, measure, change, result, gotcha. I kind of know where if it's got repeatability, we can build some stuff around it. But there's actually one founder I talked to recently, and they ended up accidentally as accidental as any startups can be, finding something beautiful, which was that looking at failed drug trials and actually going through the work during the trial and finding what it accidentally fixed. And what they've been able to do was find numerous medications that actually had beautiful direct effects, but because the goal of the study or the particular medication at the time was towards A,
Yeah.
and we Y showed up along the way. You're like, it might help Y, but that's not for now. And now what they've done is they've been able to go through and actually take all of these aggregate studies and data and be able to now find out what are secondary effect like. And we've got this massive amount of data. You've actually saved a ton of time, because if we use the data that's available and it's trustworthy and has repeatability, then we can get it back into that experiment again much more simply and quickly and accurately. It's the highest level of accuracy is always the goal. It's, we'd love to say it's, it's 100%, but nothing's 100%. The only thing that's not 100, that is 100%, is that it's not 100%. That's
Yeah.
if you get to 100, it's lucky, more as much as there's anything else. But I loved that idea of, let's take the experiments we have and keep track of them. And I think this happens in business too. It's not about like pivot. When you say pivot, it sounds terrifying. It's like you're like tacking in sailing. Tacking is a very
it's very
intent-driven,
terrifying.
purposeful thing that seems wild in the direction change, but it has a very distinct long-term effect by a short-term action. And it's as much scary as exciting, because like, how do you pick the right thing to do? And that's why being able to think quickly and make a decision, knowing that I understand the possible net effects of this, and I can weigh the 80 versus the 20, and to be a decision maker, to be able to take that and then now take action and inspire a group of people to take that action with you, which is also, there are great technologists, there are great doctors, there are great, people of every, nature of what they do, but they aren't necessarily great leaders. And so leadership is the ability to not only understand what's being done, but to understand how to rally people around that mission in a way that allows them to feel that they participate and really are contributing towards it, and that you end up contributing back to them in some way. But there's such a dichotomy in that leadership is having the understanding of the problem, but also having the understanding about the people that experience the problem and the people that will solve the problem.
Yeah. Well, and your point about how do you lead and inspire a team into the face of that uncertainty, like using that pivot moment, that business tacking moment, is like, there's different ways it happens, and there are different like leader archetypes that manage to do it. One of the things that just kind of loops back to my perspective, and like I gravitate towards science and knowing how things work, is that a charismatic leader sometimes can get people to do the pivot literally. Like, I'm not saying people are saying this in their head, but they're more or less like, that guy is impressive as heck, and I'll just go. Or that gal is like, yeah, she is all that, and I will go where she goes, right? Like, full stop. But lots of people are successful leaders who don't have that level of like stardom or charisma. And this is where I love breaking down, are there ways you can actually help a team learn to deal with uncertainty? So almost like building the skill set for them, so they don't just have to take your word for it, although you're going to be first on the line as you're leading in the new direction. But how do you actually build their capacity, not just to follow you, but to actually find it in themselves? And so this is where I think there's both like mindsets, but also real skill sets that help. And like some of those are, for example, often when there's uncertainty, there's a learning gap. There is something, there's where you are, and there is some gap between what you need to know to feel confident you're going to be successful in the new direction. But if we can actually articulate and identify what that might be for all the people involved, that can be super helpful. A second piece is often when we're facing uncertainty, we need more time to think. Like, we actually need some time to kind of process and think out and not just sort of react. So that's another thing that, again, you can think about how your team gets some time and space to think together, but also potentially independent. And then I think the last piece is actually, it's one of the other buckets of performance, which is literally our physiology and our biology, which is to say, it is stressful to be walking off into the uncertainty. Our brains don't like it. But if we can keep an eye on knowing that we need to care for our physiology, stress is not a bad thing for us. And stress is often how we get great purpose in our life. This is something like Kelly McGonigal and others have written about very well. But I often think about, it's worth thinking about how your team is doing. Are they overworked? Are they getting enough sleep? Are you encouraging them to take a walk at lunch, or just a little bit of decompressed time, even if it's an 80-hour week? Some of these little things really help our brains deal with that uncertainty. So again, that's a charismatic leader, when you have one, awesome. But lots of people are important leaders who aren't going to be that. And there are wonderful ways to help lead a team in that new direction.
Yeah, it's funny in tech, I'm always, it's not unique in and of itself, but I'd say there's a uniqueness in that there are people that are building products that are effectively going to emulate human behavior, yet some of the engineers that are building it likely wouldn't pass a Turing test themselves. There are people that have just fantastical levels of skill towards one thing. We talk about sort of the 10x engineer, which I absolutely dread that term. You find me a 10x engineer. The reason they're a 10x engineer is because 9x people quit because they had to work next to that 10x person. Be careful about the super leader and the super employee, because they can be a risk, right? They're actually potentially they're grabbing and holding on to too much stuff, and that's also a behavior problem of I feel important when I have ownership. And there is this beauty in ownership, but you can also have ownership even when you're not affecting the decision directly, right? And that's part of the charismatic leader, is that we are doing a thing, and my leadership style, I try to think of we succeed, but I struggle, right? So if there's a failure, I have to look for what was the thing that I could have done that could have affected this. And then secondary to that, is there anything else around me that could have made it go a certain way? But when it's we, the first thing I try to look for is who else in this circle of creators, how do we collectively get to this result, and make sure we celebrate that. It's not that we don't acknowledge the misses, but make sure that we truly collectively celebrate the wins, because it's very easy to get set aside an individual, and then that also affects general performance in the teams and in leaders. There's going to be a point where there's two sort of alpha style leaders that will come into an organization, and you just going to set them out behind the barn and say, all right, come back. One of you comes back, or both of you come back. You choose. So there's also the ability to be such a strong force in driving a company's goals and direction, while also having a reasonable amount of empathy on the effect on other people day to day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tactical empathy, as I think that was Chris Voss's sort of way to describe it, is that, and it's present in so many ways. It's just that we've learned to describe it now, and we build heuristics around it, which is interesting. But that becomes this, there's a power in the collectiveness. There's a power in the belief that we can go together, and the feeling of belonging. That's the Culture Code. I think it was one of the greatest books that described it that way. Is that we simply seek a culture of belonging. And that doesn't mean that we have hugs and we all eat the same flavor of cake and we all go to the same movies. It means that we all believe that we're collectively working towards a goal which we're proud of, and that we see our place in the path there, and we see the effect that we have, and it has meaning to us, and has meaning. We believe it has meaning to the others around us. There's a perception that's required, whether even it's real or not, because it's also, it can't just be, you have to perceive it to be. that's the wildness of humans, is like,
Oh,
you could have an
yes.
amazing thing, but you still feel like I'm doing nothing. Like I just feel useless. And like, you understand
Yeah.
this? Oh boy, it's hard to separate yourself from that stuff sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and part of the beauty of team also is even our own perceptions are short lived. So, I mean, any number of people have said, like, oh, yeah, I won that thing. And it felt really like in an individual sport. And it felt great for like 3 minutes. And then I was like, well, now what? Like, what's next? But when you have a team and you do something together, you keep it alive for each other. A very tactical example is like, oh yeah, you got together to go out to eat, and you're like, hey, remember that time when that client wanted this, and then we had to do this, and oh my gosh, we were up all night, and then we like scraped it out. Like, oh yeah, that was so tough. Oh yeah, but it turned out so good, And you relive it. You sort of like you each take a chance to sort of bat the wheel around, and it keeps it alive for us. That sharing memories, sharing that experience, sharing that win has a way of keeping it alive longer than even when you are the winner. You were solely responsible for it happening. How long that lasts. So
Yeah, and there's such an interesting thing of, especially when we're in startups or in any company, it's like you're going to the world and telling a story, and
mhm.
at some point it can feel almost by rote, like you develop a script. It's like, but there's a passion that always comes through in the person that can do it. And sometimes people think like, oh, it's like acting. You're like, well, Strasberg wasn't wrong in describing the way that improvisation works, and this idea that it's actually one of my favorite books. It's called "Accidentally on Purpose" by Strasberg, talking about how what seems like it's random is actually very well planned. And that's because we've rehearsed what are the 10 possible answers to this thing. That's why improvisation is around yes and. It's all this, when somebody says that, you always yes and it moves it along between the group. And the idea like this interplay, that is the thing that has to stay alive. And if you ever feel like, oh, here goes the founder story again, like I would take those people aside and said, I know you've heard this 200 times. You got to understand, 80% of the people in this room have only heard this. They're only going to hear this today. And I know it's tough sometimes, but remember that's like, take that energy that you've heard so many times and pull it down. We wince and cringe at the dad jokes that we've heard 1,000 times, but we still laugh at them when you see somebody react to it the first time. That's we have to recapture, and that ability to continuously recapture passion about the greater good and the goal. That's there's a self-drive that's needed that also I think is sort of separated in folks that I find they just have to find the inspiration to just try again when everything else is going sideways.
yeah. Well, and the idea that like we're all capable of growth, which means that like the 100th time you give the presentation, something new can still happen.
Right.
Like again, with the energy you bring to it. So yeah.
And in fact, like the best presentations I've given I don't prepare a lot. I always say that, like I'm literally going to go through the script, because that's how you always joke and you say, hey, I just wrote this on the plane on the way out here. I literally do every time. And that's because I know my talk track. I know where I need to end up, and I know where I'm starting. And I know the 3 or 4 beautiful plot points along the way that I can pull people through the story. But I also know that when I get there, if part of my plot point story is to describe Tesla, as a brand or as a style, as a company, or as a technology, but I'm, in North Dakota, probably pull Tesla out of that list and maybe find something that's more local, right? Like
Yeah.
adapt to the local surroundings and adapt to the environment. That is an adaptation that's also present in that idea of leadership, is that, okay, if you take everything away and you had to rebuild from first principles right here, right now, based on your surroundings and based on your inputs, how would you reapproach this process right now? And it's like, okay, cool, rethink that. Like, look at the audience and you see them looking down at their phone. You're like, okay, then ask a question, like lean forward, move around. There's so many things you can do to re-engage people and not be, as we go to the next slide,
Hmm. Yeah.
it's like they have to find that passion in themselves every day. And there's a beauty and it's in you. Like I can see it's literally, it pours out of you with
Oh.
every sentence you say, because you've discovered how to discover it in yourself, which is what makes it so beautiful for others to discover beside you in themselves. And I think there's something that's magical about that. You can't tell somebody to be inspired. It's like it just doesn't work like
Yeah.
that. But you can
No.
tell somebody something that will inspire them.
Yeah. Yeah. Or help. Yeah. Or help them figure out like what. Yeah. What would inspire? What would that look like? What form would it take? And I think this is one of the interesting things of, again, working around the different buckets of performance science, like as just my lens through which I think of things, like how you help someone motivate or think about things can happen from many different angles. And I love it because it doesn't require that it be the same for everyone. Some people, once they strategically know what they have clarity about that, it's highly motivating. For other people, they want to be in the execution bucket and start just stacking up days and then looking at the 60 days where they've done like what they said they were going to do as a leader or as a founder. Like that's what's motivating, and seeing that like stack of that habit or that thing. For some people, it's getting the right mindset, like of saying like, I'm going to lean into my creative side and I'm going to approach every day like creatively and not spend a lot of cycles on anxiousness or worrying, and it just lights them up, and then they're like on fire, right? So they get a different mindset. Like some people, they get a good night's rest, right? They take care of their biology a little bit, they get some exercise, and then they're on fire. Again, this is not to say that things are complex. They tend to have multiple, it's an ecosystem. So usually there's more than one thing involved, but I love that science doesn't dictate it has to be exactly this for every person, but it does give us a way to navigate this maze of like, what's performance? How could we each think about our performance, or how could we help the performance of our teams, again, in a way that is motivating and says this is a solvable thing. We can figure it out together, as opposed to this is judgment. This is a bar you have to reach. This is a way of excluding people, as opposed to saying, no, we can all use these principles. And this is what I love about it. Like, full stop.
It's the Edison sort of thing of like, we've invented 10,000 ways not to do things, right? Like I that's the idea of continuous experimentation, because it will go wrong. And that's probably why I fell in love with disaster recovery. I'm like, wait, you can get paid for when stuff goes wrong? I'm like, fantastic. I love finding when stuff goes wrong. I'm like a chess player. I'm overthinking 5 steps ahead of like, what are the 10 different things that could go wrong, so that I can be as prepared as possible for when I reach that point. And I think Shaun White, snowboarder, one of the interviews I saw early on, and it stuck out with me. I wish I could find the interview, because it was probably just, he said it without even thinking about it. It's like, how did you first learn how to jump? He's like, I didn't. I just knew I could land. Like that was what mattered to me. Like I knew that you just got better at knowing that no matter what the change in angle or whatever the effect was of other externalities, I know from this position where I can get back to the ground. And that gives you the comfort to then experiment. And that is how you learn how to jump, by first learning how to land a lot of different ways. And there's something that's missing in how we describe growth to people. Is like, no, you pick one thing and you do it well, and you follow your 30, 60, 90, and then you get your 12-month plan. I can tell you what, 12-month plans are only good at one thing, and that they're proving that they're 11 months too old. We very rarely do the things we said at the start, but we do very well in the first 90 days. And that's when we should like recheck, recalibrate, and seek the wrong answer, because that means there's one less thing to try. Like, be proud when you hit a negative, but you're like, fantastic. I don't need to go down that alley again.
That doesn't work. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
exactly.
Let's not do that again. Now, when you're snowboarding, it's a painful discovery. My oldest daughter is a professional snowboarder, and let me tell you, I've seen her. I've seen a lot of crashes, and
Yeah.
that's the thing that we also unfortunately glorify is that you look and you say, oh, they closed that deal in 12 days. Oh, look at that. He just did a 1280. Look at that. They just, got their first million in revenue in a month. You're like,
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff that you didn't see that made that happen.
Yeah. Yeah,
Be careful
absolutely.
how you think this is this black swan event. To like, it was actually pretty predictable.
Yeah. Oh man.
Well, there's 1,000 things I could go through, and I've probably taken far more of this with my own voice than I wish I had. But definitely, Carla, there's so much we could explore, and I do want people to look at what you are doing with THAXA. So who's the right person that you love to see coming to you, and what are the ways that you like to? What's the outcome that you help them to achieve?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of pieces here. Number one, like I work across industries. Generally, I find that I work with people who are at the level of kind of autonomy and responsibility, where they are responsible for some things like strategy or setting some of the direction. Um, Again, like both, and also having responsibility for like what those results are. This can be like startup founders and leaders, but it also can be people who are executives in established companies. Like sometimes that's the CEO, but sometimes it's a large enough company and like it's a director. It's someone who is responsible for pushing something forwards. But I find that, again, that's where you're in that position of saying, okay, no one's going to hand me a playbook for this. I need to make my own structure. And I find that it's really helpful to base that, to have some basis for that, to have a thought partner for that. A lot of the benefits of the work we end up doing together, it's obviously going to be somewhat specific to what people's goals are. And we certainly tailor to that. But I think some really key benefits that people are routinely finding, number one, they get a lot more clarity on some of those questions about what do we want to have happen? What are the priorities for that? They get, again, some like weight lifted in terms of like how to think about time and their bandwidth and where to spend that, but also how to think about getting their team to scale effectively, how to be thinking about not just what they're doing, but what like other people are doing as well. Often we can shift them to being a little more proactive. And then I think another thing is we think a lot about the ecosystem and the visibility of it all. So not just about the results they're producing, but also who is seeing those results, who needs to know about the results, everything from managing stakeholders and thinking through that to just how do you recognize your team in ways that feel really good to them and like motivate them. So a number of different benefits, but again, like I think people love making progress and we help people think through, get clarity about what's the progress they want to make. And then we work to help them make that progress and support them in that. So
There's a reason why this doesn't fit in a self-help book. They're great for getting you started, but ultimately, yeah, to get on a curated path that the advantage of economy of scale is unmatched as far as like why you're such a fantastic place to go to reach for these goals as a partner is because you've specifically seen the effect in many situations. No therapist can do that, right? That's one of the challenges. We should recommend everybody should have some therapist time, because you're going to need it for a bunch of reasons. But like, they do not have the business goal in mind, and there's something special about being able to have a personal. You want to help them personally, but you also can help them towards, because they may have to have some tough, lessons. So like, I understand you want
yeah,
to do this, and I understand you also want to find work-life balance. I understand that you don't want to lay off your team, but I understand your finances are going in a difficult direction. So, you can help them to validate or at least just socialize some of their ideas, and you can
yeah,
use heuristics you developed and seen in other places, where it's like, there's no lather, rinse, repeat option for there. There's no
yeah, right.
201 help book. There's no 30. This is 501 level stuff, right?
Yeah,
It's it's tough to find. And I love that you've done it, and I love your approach to it, which is why you've been successful. And I hope continued success continues to come. I just hope that I get to the point where I can actually engage you as a coach as well as just a podcast guest. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for that, Eric. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. Total delight to talk about performance with a fellow curious human being who you've been very thoughtful about, like, where you want to go, how do you want to improve yourself, and you've done your own exploration of those things. So very fun to talk about it.
The good news, I stub my toe every day, and yet I still go back and I keep on walking. Exactly. Sometimes you feel like you're walking around in a field full of rakes and getting hit in the face. But I tell you, the one thing that a wrap of what we talk about a lot when people say, "What's your favorite book?" Like, what's the most meaningful books, and they always expect it's going to be, the Jobs book by, or whatever, like some inspiring figure, or Lee Iacocca or Maya Rudolph or whatever. It's like somebody who's like a figure that we recognize. I said, the most meaningful thing for me on technology was DSM-4. Now I'm old because it was 3 when I read it, and then I got 4 because I like to get updated. I haven't touched 5 yet. I know a lot's changed, but what it was is me figuring out how humans break. And for me, that was like, if I'm prepared for the breaks and can recognize the patterns of the breakage, then I can hopefully see it arriving and know how to pull back a bit, or like know how I got there. And you've got such a wealth of very specific, you are the DSM-6 for performance coaching at this layer, because you bring the science and you care about the outcome. It's so obvious, for anybody from the outside, and the humility you approach is respectable and admired. That's something. I've met a lot of coaches, and they will tell you all about, what they are? They're network people, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. But if you just want to ramp up your personal network, there's a lot of very expensive places you can go and join clubs. But if you want to be the best of you for yourself and for others, THAXA is the solution. So I'm saying that so you don't have to. It makes it so that you never have to sell yourself here. So Carla, and I should say again, Dr. Carla Fowler, thank you very much for taking the time. What's the best place that people can go if they do want to get connected?
If they want to get connected, my website, from a coaching standpoint, is great. It has FAQs, but it also has like a media compendium. So also for people who want to just geek out on performance science, I have a lot of conversations with lovely individuals, other hosts, other podcasts. Like, we talk about a variety of different topics. So feel free to tap into that as a resource. And then I'm on LinkedIn. So that's a great place to follow along. The website's THAXA.com, THAXA. And on LinkedIn, I'm at Carla-Fowler. So
fantastic. Yeah, we'll make sure. So definitely, folks, reach out. This has been a real pleasure, and yeah, there's more to explore. And as you do have new things that come up, definitely let me know, because I'd love to dial in on some of these things. The tough part is we don't have. We could do this for 4 hours, and I know you have places to be. As
I'm not sure anyone wants to listen to us for 4 hours, but we would have a great time.
It was great. So Carla, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Eric.